Right, we're live. Okay, our first topic on the agenda tonight is recent United Kingdom EU referendum, which resulted in a victory for the Leave side.
Do you want to
The
say
Leave,
something about
the Leave camp.
that? We were both in the Leave camp, weren't we?
Yeah, as nationalists, we're obviously opposed to being part of any international entity. We want the sovereignty of our nation.
Yeah. And when we say we're nationalists, we're not actually moderate nationalists. We're more like radical nationalists. We are people who wish that a civil war broke out in the United Kingdom. Perhaps not with, perhaps we don't favour civil war with certain factions in our movement in charge because we don't like those particular factions. But we
You have more dislikes than I
want to
do.
break out, and we certainly want our ideas to be on the winning side.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's we are qualified radical nationalists. And in a way, we're disappointed that the Brexit happened because we know that if England had stayed in the EU, if the EU's insane immigration project, which some allege is actually designed to cause a civil war in the first place, people like David Icke say that. We know that if we continued in the EU against the will of the British people, or a significant part of the native population, then this would have been more conducive to the kind of conflict that we want to see in the British Isles throughout the Western world.
Not immediately, it wouldn't. Perhaps not for a long time. And also,
By the way, that's not just me saying that. That's the consensus. Because I have asked lots of other nationalists, radical nationalists, in Britain and in the London community, if you want to call it that, what they think, and that is generally the consensus. They're happy the Brexit has happened, but they're concerned that this could mean less fuel on the fire. You're still there?
I'm still there. Yeah, it's just I can hear you coming out in double. It's like there's two voices of you.
Oh,
Not anymore. There isn't. Oh,
you're right.
yeah. It sounds a bit strange because what I was saying just repeated.
I've got problems like that on my end.
Okay, I've got the conversation between me and you repeating. Oh, hold on. I think I know why actually.
Is it because
I'll see why.
watching the live outcome on?
Yeah, it's because of it's because I've got the live window open. But I've just closed the live window now, so it's all right. Yeah, you say there's the consensus among nationalists you've spoken to.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean that was my original belief that worse is better, as the saying goes. That we should get out of the EU. Sorry, that we should. It would be better if we remained in the EU because then they would really pile on the immigration.
Yeah, see, it's not actually certain if the native British population is non-Gillified enough to be able to stand up to that. It's by no means certain. So even that has its own intrepidations. But if they're not going to stand up to that, then they're not going to stand up to anything.
What do you mean if they're not going to stand up to what?
Well, if England had voted to stay, and I do mean England, not Britain, if England had voted to stay in the EU, and as a consequence, even more social tensions were created by England's perpetual membership within it. If that had happened, then a massive migration had caused all these social tensions, and England got about as provoked as it's possible to get provoked.
Well,
do anything, then they're not going to do anything ever, are they?
England got provoked for. This is the angriest England's been at immigration since World War Two. This is the most racialised England's been since World War Two. There's a very dim racial consciousness in the English people. As you said, they vote. This was a vote. No matter what people say, it wasn't a vote for democracy or sovereignty. It was at the end of the day, it was primarily a vote against immigration.
Yeah, it's a load of bullshit. We don't even have a democracy. I don't like democracy. I don't want a democratic government. However, I'd prefer democracy to the system of government we have today, which I think is defined as a polyarchy within higher education.
Yeah.
There's a strand of thought within the Western university system which says our system isn't an oligarchy where like a few people rule. It's like a polyarchy where a few special interests rule that are represented by different oligarchies that are networked together.
Well, interestingly enough, the powers that be, the Jews and their goyim hang-ons, don't like democracy either when it doesn't serve their interests. When Golden Dawn was achieving power democratically by playing by all the rules, they said Golden Dawn was a threat to democracy.
Yeah, and they imprisoned Nick Griffin and they imprisoned the BNP and all the other politicians. They did that here as well. And
it was through democracy that Hitler came to power in Germany.
Well, that was a democratic outcome, but a democracy is a system of government whereby the electorate themselves form the legislature. That's what a democracy is. And I'm a hardcore philosopher, so I don't deviate from that. I can't attenuate it. I can say that a system has democratic structures, but that doesn't make it a democracy. It's like saying that features of our government are monarchical, but that doesn't make it a monarchy, does it?
No.
You can have a Monaco where there's a prince who's in charge. He's not a king, he's a prince. He owes allegiance to some outside constitutional authority. So he's like, it is monarchical, but he's not really it's not really a monarchy, it's more of a principality. You may think that's just technicalities, but I can't bring myself to call this system a democracy unless the electorate form a part of the legislature. It simply isn't a democracy. But however, I would actually prefer living in a democracy to our current system, because I think that the people's instincts, although they are confused, I think the people's instincts are superior to the values of our rulers.
Despite all the brainwashing from the media, people's instincts would still be right.
Yeah, the instincts of the majority. I don't know what will happen when the millennials form the majority with immigrants. I don't know what that's going to be like. But certainly at this time, although it's very weak, the instincts of the British people, even immigrants who have tried to attach themselves to the white population and trying to emulate it, their instincts are generally much healthier than those of the ruling elite.
Well,
and therefore,
that brings to mind: is the ruling elite? Does the ruling elite actually have unhealthy instincts, or are they simply influenced by the Jews, by finance, by the Jews' control of finance?
Well, if they are influenced by them to that extent, then you can't really say their instincts are healthy in any meaningful sense. I mean, my understanding is the majority of MPs are still Gentiles.
Yeah.
Not Jews, they're Gentiles. And if they can't see that, then they're not healthy, they don't have healthy instincts. Yeah, I prefer democracy, certainly, to our polyarchy that we live under today. But I don't like democracy in principle. I don't think that people can be trusted. I mean, democratic forms of government allowed these people to penetrate our society. Now they've penetrated it, they're shutting down all the mechanisms that let them back in, shutting down freedom of speech, shutting down democratic representation, shutting down free movement for people who are dissidents. I don't know if you saw in the Daily Stormer recently, there was a catalogue of recent free speech outrages upon the right. In this
was that composed by Jez Turner?
I don't know if I saw it.
Yeah, it was. It was written by Jez. Yeah.
I saw it on the Daily Stormer.
I think it was Martyrs. Well, part of the title was Martyrs. Was it Paul Gascoigne was in it?
Yeah, Paul Gascoigne. But they weren't really martyrs because they weren't members of our movement.
Yeah.
Except Joshua
Bonehill.
I don't really have much time for Joshua Bonehill, considering, well, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think that saying that making stories up about pubs banning people from coming in and causing fights, and he's not very, doesn't seem like a very particularly bright person. I mean, he invented an ideology called National Bonehillism. And I remember reading on his blogs that he was raving about National Bonehillism being the only way out for the white race, and everyone has to worship him.
That was about 2 years ago. We met two. He did have followers of his political group because I remember we were in a pub and there was these two followers of Joshua Bonehill who gave me a web address for National Bonehillism.
Yeah, it's just preposterous. I don't really know what Bonehillism encapsulates.
Well, if you look at Bonehill as a troll, as a prankster, then he starts to make more sense. If you don't take him seriously and just look at him as someone who's trying to troll people, then you can tolerate him.
Well, the thing that makes him pathetic is that he doesn't take himself seriously. So, he is all right. He's a martyr because he was, although I don't agree with him, he's from the movement, and he is a kind of martyr. But he's the only really the only one in that list apart from Garron Helm, and he only got 2 weeks because he got upset and went blubbering to the judge.
I think it was only 1 week in the end.
Yeah, but can you actually regard Garron Helm as being in the movement because he renounce nationalism at his trial?
I'm not sure what he said, but I know he apologised.
Yeah. So, right. Well, let's just be generous and say yes, he is also a part of the movement. So there's 2 individuals. One of them only got 2 weeks. That's not anything really. So the only one left is Joshua Bonehill, and I'm not really impressed by his antics. Paul Gascoigne isn't a member of our movement. He's not a nationalist at all. He's politically correct. He just voiced some type of joke that would have been funny in the 1990s, but is now seen as a form of blasphemy today.
Yeah. Who's the other person?
Paul Gascoigne.
The Nazi dog.
Oh yeah, he wasn't nationalist in any sense.
No, he actually had a communist tattoo.
Yeah, he was just a left wing millennial
prankster. Yeah,
slob making a joke about Hitler. I mean, and this is Fawlty Towers stuff. This is what they used to do in Fawlty Towers, and the idea that people are now being arrested for that. But I suppose it's also tied in with the fact that now it's illegal to upset people's emotions. In the 1960s, if you took if your wife was up to no good, like up to various shenanigans sexually, and she decided to dump you for someone else, and she kept dumping people for other people, and you showed a picture of her naked, that was considered to be a joke.
Yeah.
And people would have thought that, well, that's her own fault, silly slut. But now that's like a heinous crime, and they regard it as being as serious as a physical assault.
Yes, they do, yeah.
Also, because it's now regarded as a special political crime, because it's regarded as a form of misogyny. And I read in the paper recently that the police in Nottingham are going to get special training in misogyny, and they're going to outlaw catcalls, like builders when they whistle at women who walk past in the street dressed like sluts. And really, that's pretty mild, because in Iraq those women would be stoned. And because you might whistle at them and pay them a compliment, now that's going to be like not just a crime; it's going to be a special hate crime. I think I read that in the Daily Mail. So maybe the pug Nazi thing, because it was his
well, will they be vigilant in enforcing these laws? I know they have these politically correct laws on the books, but will they really be that vigilant in enforcing them? I can't think.
Well, I think they will, because the whole point of making these laws, which is the point they'll never admit to, is that they are designed to. It's not about protecting people; it's about creating more and more laws to justify more and more police budgets, police spending, police pensions, police careers, police men and women.
So you reckon it's driven by profit?
But yeah, it's all about profit. This is what happens this is how the Western Roman Empire degenerated. It had endless public expenditure to the point where people thought that just money grew in trees, and they were just the emperors were just keeping it from them. Just enormous public expenditure and infighting, and that really brought down the Roman Empire, Western Roman Empire. Not that it would have brought it down on its own, because it needed other factors, like barbarian invasion was another factor. But combined with the barbarian invasion, that type of fighting, that type of public expenditure, that type of chaos and waste of public resources, and constantly clamping down on the general public to provide those resources, constantly confiscating bullying, constantly oppressing people in order to extract more and more taxes, more and more inventive taxation out of the general public, which is what happened to the West Roman Empire. Bullion was confiscated. That happened in the Depression. J.R. Roosevelt. Sorry, yeah, J.R. President Roosevelt, he went around, sent people around confiscating gold. You had to hand in all your gold.
Franklin Roosevelt, is it?
Yeah, Franklin Roosevelt. Yeah, FDR.
Yeah, FDR.
Yeah. He ordered the confiscation of gold from the general population in exchange for promissory notes. It was compulsory. It was a criminal offence to withhold it.
Yeah.
And you saw that they can't really do that. The nearest we've come to that in modern times is in Cyprus. And the government went into people's bank accounts without even a warrant, on a whim. Illegally just stole people's money to balance the books. And you have people like the Chinese who hold all these debts, these treasury debts, who will insist that the population, which is not their population, because when a country borrows money, they don't just use what's in their treasury as collateral. They use the country as collateral. They use the GDP as collateral. They use their own consumers as collateral. So when America is unable to pay back its debts in the way they promised to, you will see Chinese businessmen surveying areas of land in America. I mean, there was a proposal by the Chinese government that the American government give them a huge plot of land in Ohio, a huge industrial estate in Ohio, as a form of compensation that would effectively be part of China. And that thousands of Chinese workers would come in and work it, which would basically be like a giant Chinese colony.
Yeah, sort of mini China in the middle of the United States.
Yeah, and it's eerily reminiscent of Homefront, which is a film and a video game.
As I understand, the United States is in debt to China quite heavily.
Yeah, but there's not much. China depends upon that debt as leverage. So they need
So-
each other.
So the United States borrows money from China,
Yes, it borrows.
as well as borrowing money from the Federal Reserve.
Well, the thing
Is
is,
that right?
the Federal Reserve is run by the US banks, and the banks print money. My understanding is the banks print money, which they lend to the US government at interest.
Right.
Part of the strength of the US economy, in a way, is the Federal Reserve, because it's meant to be independent. It's meant to be if people have more confidence in a market that is run by banks, or at least not run by the government, than they will have in an economy that is run by a government. The least run by a government it is, the more confidence that market will have, the economy will have, and the more investment will go into it. So having having a private institution issue the US money is a way of shoring up confidence. But the problem is they're issuing America's, like they're causing a banking crisis, currency crisis. And then in order to alleviate that crisis, they're charging the US government, the people they're ripping off, money in order to do it.
Right.
And there's a lot of evidence to suggest these hedge funds, which have caused this problem in the first place, they've actually been manipulated deliberately to cause that crisis. People knew that it would cause a recession, which they could profit from. So that's the problem with the aim of giving power to a private institution to issue money is to show up confidence, but actually what you end up with is corruption that far surpasses anything the state could meter out in terms of sophistication.
So China and America are economic. Well, they've got the biggest GDPs in the world. Yeah.
I think America's got the biggest GDP.
Well, no, I think China. Well, so when I say they got the biggest GDPs, I mean China's second. Apparently.
China isn't second per head. It's only there's a difference between GDP per head.
Yeah.
And GDP throughout the whole country. I think there's a difference in gross national product?
Gross domestic.
And gross domestic product, yeah. Gross GNP and GDP. There's a difference between the two. And gross domestic product is not necessarily a good indicator of prosperity.
No.
Because that money could be held with the elites or with foreign investors.
I mean, economics, I don't properly get. I mean, the US has a $19 trillion national debt.
Yeah, well, I've never studied economics, so I don't really understand how it all works. But I know that just because a country has capital in it doesn't mean that that capital is being held in the hands of the people.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that the average life for the person in that society, the average citizen's life, is prosperous. Because much of that money could be held by foreign companies who have invested in that country.
Mm. So we back to Brexit. It's a start, though. Even if it may have, even if worse is better, it's still a start that we've managed to leave the EU.
They're saying that the Brexit is going to cause GDP to diminish. Well, of course, it's going to diminish because there are going to be fewer people entering the country. I mean, you still go up. I mean, the economy always grows, but it will grow at a slower pace because there are fewer people. Not because we're becoming less prosperous per head, but because there's less capital being produced because there's less people coming in.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I don't understand. I mean, if your objective is to create the greatest happiness for the greatest number of your national citizens, why are you promoting mass immigration? Why does a LGBT.
That objective is what they say on the surface that their objective is, but actually in actuality, it's a very different objective that they have. So they sort of lie to themselves. They convince themselves they're working for the greatest happiness of the greatest number, but all the while they're doing something completely different.
That they would all say that, wouldn't they? Just to get elected. I mean, perhaps that these people are just sociopaths. I suspect so. Sociopaths who just believe their own lies and then go along with it and don't really understand what it's all about. It's a kind of a group thing.
Yes, and if you're not a sociopath, you've got to sort of become one to operate properly within the political world as it stands at the moment.
Yeah, it's so obviously wrong what they're doing in terms of mass immigration. You'd have to be some kind of psycho to convince yourself that it's right.
Well, the thing is, though, like where the politicians come from, they come from the general public. They come from the national body.
Yeah, the large sections of the general public.
So it's not just politicians; it's large sections, as you're going to say, large sections of the general public are also believe that mass immigration is good.
Yeah, I've actually been stopped in the streets by idiots. When I was at university, I used to go to the high street all the time. There's nothing to do there yet. And I used to be stopped by student charity workers, and they always used to have a smile on their face, and they always used to be very annoying because they would try and be stopping you to get money out of you for some ridiculous charity, and it's perfectly obvious that they do that as a kind of a signal, virtue signal, try and make themselves look respectable.
Yeah,
try and make themselves feel good about themselves, and it really is pathetic. One day, one girl stopped me, and she was talking about CSV or something, it was Community Service Project, or something. I don't know what it stood for. And they said, "We're not here to just rip you off. We will use the money to train people up in third world countries to become doctors and medics and professionals who can help build the country." And as you might imagine, I sighed and I gave her a beady look because I'm just sick of this happening every single week where I go into the city centre. So I just said, well, what is that case? Like countries like Africa? And she said, yeah. I said, in that case, why are there so many black doctors in this country? Why are there so many black doctors here? You say that they're meant to. You're giving them money to help them in their own country. Why are there so many? And she was just stunned. She was shocked, as if I said, "What?" So, as if I'd said something illegal.
Well, if you said, "Oh, I've killed 10 people" or something.
Yeah, no. She said, "Well, is CSV responsible for that?" Something ridiculous like that. I said, "Have you been to St George's Hospital, Tooting?" I said, "Have you been there?" Because there's hardly a white face there. I mean, I had a very sick relative at that time who sadly died. And my liberal uncle went to visit the relative, who's like one of the most liberal people you could look. One of those liberal people you could imagine had a John Cleese moment, and he said, "There's hardly a white face there," which someone of his generation could. Only someone of his generation who's so liberal could say that. And I just repeated what he said. I said, "There's hardly a white face there." And she said, "Well," you could see her shaking. She was like, she didn't know what to make of it, and she was like angry and upset at the same time. She said, "Well, that's CSV's fault, is it?" I don't know. I don't know what you do. I don't know how responsible you are. Sounds like you're pretty responsible for it. And she just went red, and she was angry. Like she looked like she was really, and obviously she's been trained to keep the person that she's. I could tell that she'd been through training at that point, where they teach the person who's asking for donations to hang on to if you get someone who responds to you verbally, keep hold of them no matter what they say. Keep hold of them and continue to talk to them to try and get a donation out of it. Like, they've been trained professionally how to do it. But this was something so radical for her that she just made an exception. She said, "Okay, I think I'll just leave you to it." I'll just leave it there. And she sort of walked off with like a. I don't know if she was angry or if she was about to cry. It's amazing. I don't know if she was angry because she was thinking about what I'd said and she'd realised that she was living a lie, or whether she just generally believes everything that she's told verbatim, and I just don't accept it. That she believes in it so strongly, but I don't accept it. I don't know which one it was.
Yeah.
So that was my experience with the British general public.
Well, the British general public seem to show a conflict in emotions, or in viewpoints, because on one hand, there's, when they do surveys of the British general public about mass immigration, you get about 50% who say, yes, we do want to stop mass immigration. We do want an end to it. And then there's also, but whenever you talk about it in public, inevitably there's a chance that someone's going to go, "Oh, racist, racist." So it's like, I'd say the country's split, really, and this was reflected in the Brexit vote.
Yeah, it's eerily reminiscent of the Spanish Civil War.
Yeah.
Because I'm opposed to their bollocks, their cultural Marxist bollocks, I find myself in bed, not literally, but metaphorically speaking, with very strange people that I would never have dreamed of having a natural alliance with. People like gays, who see a very grave threat to their own demographic in terms of massive Muslim immigration.
Yeah.
Lesbians, libertarians. I mean, I believe in due process. I don't believe in arbitrary rule, except as an emergency condition. I do believe that in extremis, it is legitimate to have, under certain conditions, to have a government that is so autocratic that the very utterance of the dictator must be interpreted into law, but only for a limited period. It has to be renewed, and only under extraordinary circumstances. So I do believe in dictatorship in certain conditions, but I do believe in some kind of structure, some kind of a process of law. I believe that's the exception, not the rule. I do believe in a certain limited scale of civil liberties. Yeah, I don't believe that in extraordinary conditions, when you have a subversive threat within a country, with these idiots spreading homosexuality as if it's a culture or religion, and you all have to respect it, and you have to interrogate bakers if they don't, and sue them, and put them in jail if they don't make a gay wedding cake. I mean, that kind of insanity is when you've got that organised and funded by people like George Soros. Then you need laws to restrict freedom of speech. But if that's not going on, then I think freedom of speech should be relaxed a bit. Nevertheless, I find myself in bed with libertarians who don't believe in restricting the free speech of George Soros or his ability to finance massive levels of degeneracy in society and to incite it. to the point that it becomes tyrannical law. They don't believe that, but I still find myself kind of allied with them. It's like you've got a very compact, tight leftist movement in the country, which is what you have in Spain, and then you've got a broad alliance of people who object to it, the negatives. And they can be very different, and it can be very difficult to organise those people as one united front because they're all so individualistic. I mean, I've tried to have debates with conservatives and libertarians, and they've become hysterical. They don't want to. Often they will engage with me to a very limited extent, and then they won't want to engage with me any further.
Any other strange bedfellows?
Yeah, but the fact is that I'm not a unique case. I'm not a unique subject. They're going to encounter people like me all the time, and I'm not really extreme either in terms of the movement standards. So they're after an ideal that doesn't exist, and they just want to bury themselves in their own closed, tight-knit little group. But they're going to have to come out of their shell sometime, because if things really did kick off, you probably would see something like the Spanish Civil War. You probably would see a broad coalition of very diverse interests opposed to a very insidious and compact menace.
Yeah. The Civil War. This is something that people like Enoch Powell have spoken about since almost the beginning of mass immigration into the West. And there's two theories really. So the powers that be are banking on white people being so weak that they are able to, there won't be a civil war, and they will just be able to throw this immigration on us and dissolve us to minority status, or the powers that be want a civil war.
Well, I think that there are extremists within the establishment. I don't think it's an oligarchy, because that type of organisation, you'd have to have an oligarchy. It's a kind of a Venetian black nobility, I think it's called.
Right.
But I think it is a polyarchy. It's like a network of special interest groups that all tend towards one particular direction in groupthink. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, they all network together for mutual advantage. And as time goes on, as the network becomes more sophisticated, it becomes more filtered. I think that's just a natural tendency. I'm open to the idea it's been steered in a particular direction by a powerful lobby within it. But there's no definitive proof that there's overarching, all-encompassing conspiratorial group hidden within. Maybe something approaching that, but I don't think it's that sophisticated, because if it were, then they would have achieved this a long time ago. The communist one, Karl Marx thought the revolution, the CCCP, was going to become a worldwide communist global superstate within his lifetime. That's what he talked about, killing off the Highlanders and the Scottish people and the blacks and the Poles, because they would never be able to adapt in time, and they were too rural, they were too peasant-like. He thought it was going to happen in his lifetime. Communists thought it was definitely going to happen after the 1917 revolution. Only the cultural Marxists believed it was going to happen after slow phases of progress. And at the moment, even the cultural Marxists thought that the revolution was going to happen a long time ago, perhaps for the return of the millennium. So if it was that sophisticated and that resourceful, they would have implemented what their machinations for the world by now. They would have shut down the web by now. We wouldn't be having this conversation if they were that sophisticated.
Yes. Well, so the Civil War could work in our interest, couldn't it?
Well, it depends who's leading it. I mean, I don't know if there will be a civil war, but if there is one, I imagine it will be something like the Spanish Civil War.
Right, let's move on to America. The next topic, Black Uprising. Now, from what I've been reading, there's not actually any epidemic of police officers, specifically white police officers, killing blacks disproportionately. That's entirely a figment of the black race's imagination.
Well, I think police officers always kill people disproportionately in America, particularly when they have guns and they don't know if the people they're investigating are going to open fire on them. And a lot of, because I think, mistake me if I'm wrong, but I think they'll actually elect their police chiefs. I know we do in this country with commissioners, but it didn't always used to be that way. They also elect sheriffs and they elect judges. And as a consequence, the judiciary and the police are very corrupt. So they don't have the same level of professionality that our police services do.
I've noticed the American police are very trigger happy, and there was that case I read about a few weeks ago where this kid asked what he was being arrested for, and the police officer refused to tell him until, in the end, the police officer just had a taser with him, and he fired it on the kid for 13 seconds or 30 seconds.
American police think that if you disrespect them, it's the same as assaulting them.
Right.
And you can usually get away with that because they're police. And as I said, the system is democratic.
But there was way more whites killed by police than blacks. Now, I know, of course, that's proportional to the population. Whites are 62% and blacks are 13%. So you'd expect more whites to be killed, even though blacks commit more crime as a race than whites. Well, this black uprising is going global. There's been protests in the Netherlands as well as Manchester and London in England and in Germany. And I saw them holding signs saying "End white supremacy." And really, they might have all just carried signs saying "End the white race," because that's what they effectively want to do.
On Germany?
No, not in Manchester in England.
Well, in the white race.
Well, they had signs saying "End white supremacy."
Yeah, in Germany they actually do have signs saying "End the white race." They call it Volkstag.
Well, that's carried by Germans, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So they demand Volkstag.
Folk death.
Yeah, people death or genocide.
Yeah. Yeah, they have Bomber Harris do it again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I'm not. I mean, I personally, I don't really have. I'm not one of these hypocrites who, just because a German victory would have been better. I'm not saying it would have been brilliant, but it would have been better than the Allied victory. I'm not one of these hypocrites who goes around and sort of sheds these crocodile tears. What I see in the movement is a kind of reverse virtue signal.
Right, go on.
Where people like...
Are you going to say you don't really care about Bomber Harris killing the Germans?
Well, it's debatable, isn't it? I mean, is it legitimate to target a infrastructural target with saturation bombing?
Well, I was listening to a German speaking on Millennial Woe's channel, and he was saying that he doesn't reckon the Brits should feel guilty for Dresden. He reckons it's just another thing that no country should feel guilty for anything, and he doesn't reckon it's just pointless to apologise for it.
I do have some standards. I think in extremis it's right to abandon those standards if it's absolutely necessary, but I do have some standards, and I don't believe it's legitimate to target non-combatant civilians, particularly when you're at war with a country that signed a warfare that you've signed. I don't think that's legitimate to target civilians. But if the question is there any obligation to avoid civilian casualties in the targeting of enemy infrastructure and personnel? That's the question. Are workers if you have workers in a munitions plant, are they combatants?
Right.
I mean, in the Iraq War and the Kosovo War, the British government targeted TV stations because they said these were legitimate targets, legitimate military targets, because they were pumping out enemy propaganda.
Yeah.
Is that legitimate? So these are legitimate questions that have to be asked.
Yeah.
I mean, if you are fighting a total war, I suppose munitions factories are a legitimate target. Munitions workers are a legitimate target. Enemy scientists are a legitimate target. Are the women of your enemy a legitimate target because they produce people? They have give birth to men and women who could go on to become munitions workers or soldiers? No, I don't think so. I don't think that's legitimate. But if it directly assists, I think you can be if you're a civilian that's directly involved in the enemy war campaign, then under certain conditions that can be legitimate, unless special rules apply. I don't see if I went to war with an unknown power tomorrow, and I had no idea what kind of rules of engagement they would pursue, and there was no agreement between us, I would consider anyone who assisted their war effort as a legitimate target, whether it's morally or financially or politically or in terms of labour, whether they've been conscripted into it or not. So these are all legitimate questions. I mean, is it okay to bomb an area where workers live? Is that okay if they are working on war production? I mean, they're not armed, so it's controversial. But I would say that Bomber Harris, were he here today, I think he would say that we were not targeting civilians. We were targeting enemy infrastructure with saturation bombing that we knew would incur a high collateral casualty rate. But we were not under any special obligation to avoid civilian casualties. We were just under an obligation to refrain from targeting civilians. Avoiding civilian casualties and refraining from targeting civilians are two entirely different things.
Interestingly enough, Bomber Harris is David Irving's hero.
Well, that's a bit controversial, but it's not surprising David Irving would be controversial. What's his reasoning for
that? I didn't understand the reason, but I saw a photo of him in the 1960s, of David Irving in the 1960s, shaking hands with Bomber Harris, and he said he's one of my heroes. He admired him because he was, according to Jonathan Bowden, it was because he saw in him a warrior.
Well, I think David Irving is just someone who caught attention and controversy. He said himself that he likes being, he enjoyed being spanked at school because he enjoyed being made the victim so he could complain.
Right.
Well, either he said that or somebody did. I don't know who it was. But
so you sort of have a psychological analysis of David Irving.
Well, it's just I know that he's sold out before when he said He started. He couldn't get enough publishing houses to print his works, and he kept being persecuted by the Jews. And they would send people to his house to harass him, and they would get his landlord to evict him. I mean, I've been to his house, and he said that there. He said that he had to move because the landlords pressure had been put on them to evict him. So. I think that I can understand why he sold out and said that yes, there were gas chambers. That's what he said. He said there were gas chambers. We know that the only reports of gas chambers are fake. But now he's going on about these Reinhard camps where people were allegedly gassed, and there's no evidence. I haven't heard any evidence that millions of people were gassed in the Reinhard camps. There are no archaeological digs going on there. Because if you think about it, they claim that hundreds of thousands of people are buried at Treblinka. Thousands of corpses. But they never allow any kind of excavation to go on there. And there was that ridiculous archaeologist, Sophie Coles.
Yeah, I mean, the Grand Dragon recommended we go and disrupt her event.
Yeah. But she cancelled it, obviously.
She did, yeah.
And Sophie Coles visited Treblinka and then proceeded to try and justify this claim with shark's teeth. And one smashed tile with a logo on the back that looked like a Star of David, but what was actually a pierced mullet star, and it was the logo of the company that made it. And she's holding the piece of time, but oh my God. It's pathetic. So if they were that desperate for evidence, you would have thought that they would leap on the chance to uncover these mass gassing sites, allegedly, in the so-called Reinhard camps. And it hasn't happened.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk. I think it was because some communications about murdering people on the Eastern Front by Heinrich Reinhard, but that went on all the time.
Reinhard Heydrich.
Yeah, Reinhard Heydrich. That went on all the time. They were massacred. I'm not saying that the Jews were not massacred, and that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there were no mass gassings of millions of people. Germans,
I never actually read a official history book, but from what I understand, they say roughly about half of the Jews killed were by gassing, so about 3 million were gassed.
It never happened. There were no homicidal gas chambers. Thousands of people were killed. I think that the number of Jews who were killed in World War II, this is just a complete wild guess. So I'm not saying I'm right. But if you were asked me to guess how many Jews were killed in World War II in Europe, I would say about 50,000.
Yeah.
Nowhere near. I mean, I'm that's being very, very generous.
Apparently, the gas chamber myth originates with Ilya Ehrenberg in the Soviet Union.
I thought it originated because that's what the Jews told each other when they were on the trains. I mean, it's pathetic how they whine and moan about how they were they were cramped onto cattle trains. They were lucky to get onto a cattle train. Most people had to walk. You had marching columns. People who were not fit to walk, allegedly, according to them, were shot.
According to Reverend Oliver, the American military set up gas chambers, not real gas chambers, fake gas chambers.
Yeah, in Dachau.
Yeah, that's right, to show the Germans what was going as propaganda for the Germans. And
you have no modern evidence. When modern archaeologists do investigate these sites, they try and justify their wild claims with shark's teeth.
I read a conversation between Germans in 1953, and Savitri Devi said, apparently they've built gas installations in the camps to show what you were doing, and he said, well, it will save, and the German, who was a former Nazi, says it will save us the trouble of going to hassle of building gas chambers for the Jews next time. And he says, but listen to me, anyone who says that we gassed the Jews lies. We did, he said, we did cremate the Jews. And he said, you would have loved to have seen the chimneys with the fumes coming out of them, of Jewish corpses. But he said, but anyone who says that we gassed Jews is lying.
Yeah, it is a lie. Jews died of typhus. And I'm not saying that Jews were not shot. I'm not saying, I mean, when the Americans occupied Vietnam, they shelled a whole village with artillery for target practice. I don't think anyone was disciplined. There was a massacre. I can't remember the name of the massacre, but I think a colonel was involved. There was an inquiry, but no one was disciplined. But that doesn't mean, therefore, that there was a conspiracy by President Johnson in the White House to gas millions of Vietnamese.
Yeah.
It's just absurd. Why would you believe that? And likewise, why would you believe this unless you were scared of being seen not to believe it? Which is what happens in a kind of theocracy.
Yes, it's staggering how a lie can be put over on all of mankind, and the majority of mankind can believe it.
And in many countries, it's actually illegal to deny that publicly.
Would they all be? Are they? Is there any non-white country that it's illegal to deny it in?
US, but as we know, the US is extremely. See, the thing about America and Britain is that I would like to have British police who are not corrupt, but with American laws.
Yeah.
I mean, if you are ever arrested in the United States, never, never, never defy a police officer because they don't respect their own laws. When you get into court, that's the time to start pushing for your own rights. But never, particularly off camera, never do that. Never defy a police officer in any way, verbally or physically. Because they're not like British police officers. They're not professional like British police officers. I think some of them are, certainly, but I don't think that you'll have the same professionalism. I mean, that's a rich statement coming from a country which employs foreign PCSOs to grab people's cameras on Oxford Street. This is one video I saw on YouTube. But those are exceptions rather than rule, and there are many exceptions now because we've got plastic bobbies on the beat, so-called community support officers who are not real police officers, and because we've got so much affirmative action. But nevertheless, I think the police ethos and the British police is much superior to the American police. If only we had American laws to protect us. And I'm not saying the American laws are perfect. I'd like to see laws stopping their filth. I'd like to see anti-white propaganda made illegal. I'd like to see similar laws in this country, as Russia, prohibiting homosexual propaganda. I'd like to see people who post advertising in public with like a black man kissing a white woman. I'd like to have people who do that hanged. But at least in America, you can protect yourself with the First Amendment, even though there are no laws like that. But in this country, you can't.
Yes,
it's a big conundrum. Do you go for the better laws or do you go for the better police, the better judicial system? And neither of them are perfect. Both of them are corrupt, but one is better than the other.
back on the blacks, I was thinking about what the blacks want from us as white people, and I decided that blacks what blacks want black supremacy. You know, they want white people to worship them as black basketball players and black musicians and stuff. And they also want us to be slaves to work for them, to provide them with everything that they need to live on. And they also want the freedom to kill us at will, so they can just pick a white person out and kill him.
One negress I saw on internet news recently who said that America needs to abolish the police.
Yeah, I read that article.
So you can kill the white population. It's like they have the right to kill the white population, and then if anyone tries to stop them, it's oppression.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't believe in abolishing the police. I believe that in a white society, you wouldn't need as many police. I mean, you still have criminals, you still have paedophiles, you still have no good people. But we've always hanged them. In a traditional white, when Britain was a white society, when America was a white society, when it was just all colonies, you had people who were executed for counterfeiting and for uttering.
Well, I've read that. Well, Peter Hitchens said that in Victorian society there was far less people in prison than in society today. I know the population was smaller as well.
I can believe that per head there were less people in prison. Yeah.
Although, of course, the punishment was actually more severe. And there was more discipline in Victorian times than today.
You didn't necessarily have to have. You didn't necessarily have to have prison sentences. You could have had. You could have had capital punishment sentences. You had the birch back then, which is like a bundle of sticks that are tightly woven together that are meant to sting. In medieval times, you had something called outlawing, where someone would be blacklisted, and that person would not be protected by the law. So it would just be anyone could decide to kill them. It's like you would be a wild animal.
That's where the term outlaw came. Robin Hood was an outlaw, and
yeah,
you're not entitled to the protection of the law. You have to go out there on your own.
Yeah. And I think that, to an extent, should be brought back, particularly for sexual perversions or homosexuality. If they don't want to get cured, they should just go and live somewhere else.
Okay.
But yeah, I could when I saw that black person being killed on TV by a US police officer, I did actually I did feel some resonance for that person. I did feel like, because you can see what's happened. I mean, he said he had. I don't know why he said that. This is why you should never really trust. You should never really trust a American police officer to the same extent you would a British police officer. If you don't know who that person is, if you're not already familiar with him, you don't trust him personally. Because in America, they're used to blacks pulling out guns and just killing them. So I don't actually think it was a white police officer that killed that particular.
No, I heard it was Asian or Mexican.
Yeah, he was a Chinese police officer, being an American, and he kind of had a schizophrenic moment and shot him. That was the incident I'm talking about. Was the one in the Cadillac with the Negro sort of moaning in pain as he's sort of lying there. And his wife is saying, "Oh God, I hope he's not dead." And the police officer loses it. He loses his cool. He sort of shouts like he was pulling out a gun or something. not very professional. Must be a new police cadet or something. And the other one was when they had a guy in California on the ground, and he wouldn't stop moving, and he wouldn't stop struggling, and they said he was reaching for a weapon, and they just shot him at point blank range. They put a gun to his head and said, "You don't stop moving, we're going to do." He didn't stop moving, so they just put a bullet in his skull, and that was kind of disproportionate because they could have easily taken his gun off him. I can understand why they did it. It's perfectly obvious because if you are a police officer and you risk your life on a daily basis, and you've got people shooting at you and trying to kill you, I can understand why they would start to adopt rules of procedure whereby they just kill anyone who they perceive to be a firearm threat. But I don't think that's the way a professional police officer behaves. And it can cause a lot of anger and resentment if you just seem to have this guy on the floor and you just tap him in the head and he's gone. You're meant to serve the public. Nevertheless, I don't believe we should be living in a multiracial society. I think we should be living in a white society, and it would be very rare if that happened in a white society. Even with drugs awash all over the place, it'd be very rare. So I can understand why. I kind of sympathise with the rage they must feel, but they're not my people, so they're not really my problem. And they said they're going to set up a new state, I believe.
Yeah, black ethno state using 5 states across the American Southeast.
Yeah.
Which was where traditionally most blacks were because of slavery.
Yeah, and good luck to them, because I'd like them to do that. I mean, that was the plan that George Lincoln Rockwell endorsed when he met the...
Well, I think George Lincoln Rockwell wanted to ship them all back to Africa, but the Nation of Islam said, we want a black state in America using American land for our own. So I think George Lincoln Rockwell may have compromised. And,
yeah, he may have. Obviously, he did meet them and he was allies with them, wasn't
he? Yeah, but there's an article done by Hunter Wallace where he said that the fact remains that most blacks don't want separation from whites because, he pointed out that the American Colonization Society built Liberia for freed slaves, and most of the slaves didn't go back there, and the ones that did, despite having a society based on a constitution similar to America, you can just watch that Vice documentary, The Cannibal Warlords of Liberia, see what it descended into. And then there's also Haiti advertised to blacks in America and blacks in the Caribbean who are being freed from slavery to come into Haiti, and hardly any of them did it. And there's the fact that to this day and going on today is that there's way more blacks heading to America than there is blacks heading to America from Africa than there is blacks heading to Africa from America. It's the majority of blacks want to be around white people, not because they like white people. They
survive without them. They wouldn't have all their free stuff without them.
It's sort of like, they depend on white people, or they hate white people because it's like you hate the people that you depend on in a way like a teenager hates his parents.
They can't live. It's a very awkward situation because they can't live without us, but they want to.
Well, they can live without us, but they can't live the life they want to without us.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Oh, right, yeah.
They can't cope with the knowledge they have to go back to Africa because they can't cope with what it would be like. But they want to live like us, and they can't.
I mean, as I was watching a video posted on InfoWars by one black, and he said, the blacks in Africa hate us blacks in America anyway. And the blacks in America actually have a higher IQ because they've got white blood in them, quite a lot of them. They have a higher IQ than blacks in Africa.
Yeah.
So in fact, they've basically become a different form of black. So yeah. Right, do you want to talk about automation?
I think it's a good thing. But I think that if you were going to compensate for that, you'd have to have a lower number of hours. You need to restrict the number of hours people are allowed to work. You know, like France has a working week of 35 hours a week. I think Hitler imposed a working week of 40 hours a week. So
I've heard that I've read that Hitler was the first to have the 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5.
Well, he limited. I don't know what it was, but he limited the number of hours that people were allowed to work a week because he wanted to work to be available to everyone, paid employment to be available to everyone, and that's how we should deal with automation. But of course, if you import millions of immigrants, then you're not going to have automation. There's going to be no incentive to create it. There's going to be no incentive to create machines to do the jobs that people either won't or can't do to the necessary standard.
Well, I reckon that these machines will still be created anyway because it's in the nature of the white man that he wants to constantly forward his own technology. He wants to constantly create new technology. So if he can, he will.
That's how white civilization and technology has been driven by competition. And if we have a European Union where there's no competition, there's just one single bargaining platform, well, then you're not really going to get the same quality of, you're not going to get the same pace of technological progression, if that makes sense. So what they're doing is actually antithetical to progress. Like communism was antithetical to progress, but they claimed it was progress, and it isn't. It's a bit like Orwell's 1984 again, where they say one thing, but it's actually the opposite. It's not, if you think about it, it's not progressive in terms of technology or in terms of futurism to have a world where there's just like a glut of endless cheap labour, which you're causing through something called aid programs to the third world. Having said that, foreign aid is useful for bartering. I mean, when people complain about the foreign aid budget, what they don't understand is that we win contracts by bribing them with foreign aid, but that's a different matter. It's if you have a society whereby there's endless cheap hard labour from the teeming masses, there's going to be no incentive to automate, and there's going to be low employment. That means that social trust will decay, and the society will split apart into sectarian factions. And if there's no national competition, well, why would people compete with each other to see which economy is better? Why would the Germans introduce a better car if all the car companies in Europe are under the same economic model, where they can all just produce? They don't need to compete with each other because they have endless cheap labour. They have one bargaining platform, which is the European Union, to trade with the rest of the world. Why would there be any diversity? Why would there be any competition? I'm not saying there wouldn't be competition between companies within, but the more regulated economy gets, the less competition there is. I also believe in something called what I would call the Talisman Act. Talisman at the moment is it's a rule whereby if there's a court that hasn't got enough jury members, the judge can simply order the kind of bailiff of the court to go out and grab people off the street and conscript them into, press gang them into a jury. And I would pass something called the Talisman Act, whereby if you're a white male and you're native to that country, you can go into any place of work and demand a list of jobs, of employment contracts that that place of work has. And you can, if it's an unskilled job or semi-skilled job that's not covered by some kind of special exemption, you should be able to take that employment contract if it belongs to a female or foreigner. But that person gets 2 weeks to leave, and then you get that job. So that the white male population will always be enfranchised. And that's very important also for preventing hypergamy, where women, I'm not saying it's their fault, it's just like instinctive, but women will accumulate resources and money, and they'll still have like an instinctive drive to want to select the best mate. So they will always go after the man with the most money. And if they're taking up all the jobs, there are going to be very few men who earn more than they do. So I would say that a Talisman Act would also be necessary to prevent kind of widespread hypergamy and women being incredibly picky about who they go out with and never actually marrying until they're 45 or something. By then it's too late, they can have one child.
Yeah.
If you make them more desperate for resources, then they will try to pick a mate. If men are franchised rather than the women, and there's a limited number of jobs, high-paying jobs, and you keep women out, that will generally solve the hypergamy question, because they will try to marry up. Women biologically will always try to marry up. And if they're earning more money than the males, then they will try to find a male that's earning more than them, and that's not going to be very good for the population. But in terms of automation, I think it's fine as long as it's managed. If you're going to have if you think about it, our diminishing population, our shrinking white population, is not really shrinking very rapidly, but it is shrinking. It's ideal for a society that is becoming automated.
This is the exact same point that Andrew Anglin makes. And he went as far as to say that there's nothing wrong with our shrinking population shrinking.
Yeah.
Now, when you look at the size of our population compared to what it was, say, in medieval times, obviously it's much bigger due to the advancements in medicine. And what's the other thing that's caused the population to expand?
Urbanization, mass production.
Industrial revolution, yeah. Well, of course, in the past, people used to have lots of children, and many of them would die. And now they have very few children, or little or no children. Yeah, the few children who are born live for a long time. So, you know, we've got. Yeah, as you say, it's not much of a concern. The thing is, we've got to find a way we've got to decrease the number of non-whites on the earth. That's the primary goal.
Yeah, because if they breed up, they're breeding so fast, but they're not changing because their societies aren't capable of producing the types of technologies that are necessary.
Well, actually, come to think of it, just a bit off topic. China, Taiwan, South Korea, North Korea, and Japan, East Asians, their population is also going down.
Yeah, it is. And the South American population is going up slightly, but it's not going up by huge leaps and bounds. It's not the average child rate, I think in South America is like 2.5, something like that. It's not like 3 and 4 and in some cases 6, which is what you get in sub-Saharan Africa.
So if we control the numbers of Middle East South Asia, like India and Africa, then that's really what we've got to do in the future, because we can have, like, our population was in 1900 was roughly the same as it is now, and yet in 1900 we were 30% of the planet, and now we're 8%. And in the future we could have the same population as we had in 1900, but instead of being 30%, we could be 2%, because there's just so many non-whites. If we don't, and I'm sure it's entirely in our hands to control.
Yeah, what we would have to do is cut off the aid, all this aid that we give to African peoples. I mean, we don't need to enfranchise the black. The reason why we have foreign aid, right? The reason why we have so much foreign aid is because it's being used as leverage in deals. Like the Prime Minister is always obsessed with these deals with China and India.
Yeah, he is, isn't he? Yeah.
And that's what it's been used for. People don't understand that. They go, "Oh, all the foreign aid." You get these idiots like the National Front, whose policy is to abolish all foreign aid, and they don't understand what they think it's being used like UNICEF or something.
Yeah.
That's not what it's for. It's patronage. It's trade patronage. It's a euphemism for patronage, and we need to use it as a leverage, because other Western countries are also using it. But we don't really need to use it with Africa, because Africa is never meant to be decolonized. It's ours. We should just be recolonizing it. I know there would be some resistance, but it's not a country that's fit for decolonization.
Have you heard of Elon Musk?
No.
Okay. Well, he runs that company. He's the head of the company SpaceX and the founder of PayPal.
Okay.
And he was asked about his worries for the future, and he gave a kind of politically incorrect answer, because he said he's worried about a demographic implosion, and he mentions Europe and East Asia and how their demographics are how their numbers are getting smaller, and he talks about that being. He seemed aware that they're the only two civilized races on Earth, because he mentioned the need for them to keep going for technology. I mean, really, it's only the need for whites to keep going for technology to persist. But what was I going to say? Well, that's it. Also, interestingly enough, it's Europe and East Asia which have the highest rates of atheism in the world. So there's a correlation, as he was saying, between if you're wealthy, atheist, or non-religious, and well educated, then you tend to have fewer children.
That might be a bit unnatural. That might not be a good thing. That could cause serious problems. Although there are atheist societies, like there's a lot of atheism in Japan, but Japan is not what it used to be. It's not what it once was. It's not. Do you honestly expect Japan to be able to defend itself with the same ferocity that the samurai warrior displayed in World War II? No, they're too busy watching anime,
Mm.
and that's worrying because if it continues to go downhill, if it continues to lose its martial spirit, you could end up with a cultural crisis where no one wants to fight. Well, so it's very speculative, but I can't imagine ISIS trying to invade Japan anytime soon, but it's worth a thought. I just think a society is healthier when it has some kind of religious tradition. It may not be a religious tradition which has to be strictly monotheistic.
Well, I think in the future of our race, there's three options, or maybe four options. There's a a continuation of Christianity, or a return to our old gods that we had before Christianity. In other words, paganism, or a form of atheism like creativity, like Ben Klassen's creativity, where we just worship our race, but we're basically atheists.
Those are three main options, but
well, the other one, I know you don't agree, but is the Adolf Hitler becomes deified as a sort of Muhammad kind of figure.
Well, that's kind of like creativity.
Yes, it is, yeah, because there's no real supernatural element to it, unless you say he was the incarnation of a god. But I don't reckon our people will really believe that anymore.
No, and he said himself that he didn't want that to be the case.
Yeah, did he?
Yeah, he made it very plain that he did not want to be worshipped as a deity in his table talk.
But I mean, well, in Nazi Germany, they seemed to treat him as a deity. I mean, like,
well, it would be like making Napoleon Bonaparte a deity. Everyone knows he's not.
Yeah.
Or George Washington, deity. I mean, Hitler actually said on record that he doesn't want to be turned into a new Buddha.
I think, well, the thing is, Himmler already started to disobey his wishes then, because Himmler made the SS. He told the SS that Hitler was their messiah, and the savior of the German people.
Well, that could just be a metaphorical kind of messiah. Just because you call someone a messiah doesn't necessarily mean you agree with the Jewish concept of the messiah.
Yeah. Yeah, so we've basically got those three options then.
I think our race would be a lot freer if we adopted the ancient beliefs of our ancestors. But at the same time, these beliefs are intrinsically weak. There's a fundamental flaw in them, which led to them being abolished in the first place. And they're all divided. There's a structural flaw in paganism that you just don't get in Christianity. But with Christianity, it's dangerous because it could mean anything to anybody. It could be used by anyone. And it's not necessarily believable either. You need to enforce it with a rod of iron because it's so absurd. There is no evidence for white Israelites leaving the Holy Land and becoming the white race. There's no evidence for that. There's no evidence for the resurrection. There is a lot of evidence to suggest it was a seance. It wasn't a real resurrection. It was just like a metaphorical resurrection, and then that was all changed. Christianity originally started off as mystic cults based around Jesus and the teachings of Jesus. That's how it originally started as a series of mystic cults. Gnosticism, I think it was called.
Well, no, Gnosticism was one of the early forms of Christianity. But the first early form of Christianity to gain a following among the Romans was one that believed that the Jews were that the God of the Old Testament was Satan, and the Jews were evil, and Jesus Christ had been sent to save the world from Yahweh.
Right, interesting.
That was by a guy called Marcion, and there was a form of religion called Marcionism. It had a big following.
Well, maybe that is very telling of who was running Christianity at that time, that they needed to reverse it in that way.
Well, I heard they were fathers of the sect that eventually got power, the Catholic sect, viewed Marcionism as they immediately wanted to get rid of it because they viewed it as a big competitor, and they included the Old Testament with their Bible.
The Christianity that we know today was invented in the Council of Nicaea under Emperor Constantine. It was formulated by the Catholics. The original Christianity was Gnosticism. That's what it was.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Gnosticism has a very long-winded theology with tons of gods.
Yeah, they are. There's a lot of esoteric kind of Kabbalist elements to it, and there are a lot of Gospels. I mean, they kept the 4 Gospels, but it's almost adapted to be perfect. I mean, Julian Apostate, the Emperor Julian, tried to adapt paganism, but he wasn't able to. Christianity has been structured to be like an imperial religion, at least traditional Catholic Christianity is. I think we're better off with our old religions, but I think we need to do a lot of work. It's not good enough to simply introduce them and not have a kind of structure to pin them together.
Well, old religions, I mean, they are our culture. That's what can be said for them. This is what Bhagavad Gita says. Christianity doesn't proceed directly from our folk soul, whereas our old religion is their own culture. It's our own way, as it is. It's native to us. So if our old religion never happens, and we were to create gods in the image of the white man, we create something similar to Odin and Thor again, anyway.
Possibly, I'm more comfortable with the kind of Romano-Greek tradition. I don't know why. I think it's because they're easier to understand. There'll be more records have been preserved about those gods. And they kind of represent Roman imperialism, which is in direct contradiction to Judaism.
Right. Okay. Chilcot Inquiry.
Do you think that Blair was wrong to go to war in Iraq? Where did you stand? I don't know how old you were when the Iraq war broke out.
Well, I do remember it breaking out. I was 15 at the time, and I remember watching that famous scene of the bombs going off. The first bombs being dropped on Iraq.
Yeah, the shock and awe campaign.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
I was working at the time, and I remember the staff there saying how weird it was that in England we were having this massive debate about whether or not we should go to war, and everyone's horrified about the idea of going to war, and everyone was against it. And in New York, because one of the staff had gone there to see like a relative, she said in New York there is no debate. There's no debate whatsoever.
Yeah. Well, they're all for it.
Yeah, there was no controversy about it.
Hmm.
And ironically, they actually did better in the war than we did because they had a better leadership, better command structure. This government was under Blair was terrified of what might happen if the British general public had to see more casualties going on in Iraq. Towards the end of the British occupation in Basra, they were actually stopping soldiers from doing anything, right, without individual permission from Whitehall.
Yeah, that's very long-winded. Makes you can't really fight a war like that.
No.
Well, no, I don't reckon. I reckon Blair would have been entitled to go to Iraq if he was conquering it in the terms of an old-style colonialist project. I mean, the British Empire created Iraq in 1921. If we went and took Iraq back as territory for ourselves and governed it, then it would have been okay as a colonial province. But at the end of the day, the reason Bush and Blair invaded Iraq was because they were prompted by the Jews, because the Jews saw Saddam Hussein's Iraq as a threat to Israel. And
yeah, I regard the speed at which we went to war in Iraq as indicative of the Jewish nature of 9/11. Right. If it had already been decided. And indeed, Wesley Clark said it had already been decided. Even he was impressed. He's Jew, isn't he? Wesley Clark?
He is, yeah. Yeah. There's a paper written in 1996, I think it's called A Clean Break. And it was written by one of the people who wrote it was Benjamin Netanyahu, who was Prime Minister of Israel at that time, as he is today. And they talked about how they wanted it. It was written by a group of neoconservative Jews in America, and they emphasized how much they wanted to get rid of Saddam Hussein. So it wasn't a war fought in our interest. No. Well, the Chilcot inquiry doesn't reveal that Blair and Bush, or that Blair had succumbed to the Jews. Well, the Blair was, obviously he's not going to reveal that. So he doesn't reveal the whole truth.
The Iraq War failed. I mean, they were talking on Newsnight last night or some other program about how the Iraq War was going to fail and it was inevitable. And Chilcot report said that they don't agree that the circumstances were unforeseeable. And I think that could be so, but if I know that, I mean, what Iraq is, it's a country that is it's a sectarian country. It's more like three countries that are crudely welded together.
Is this because it's got three ethnic groups?
Yeah, the Kurds, the Sunnis, and the Shia.
Yeah.
The first thing that you should have done, this is my point of view, and it's going to be if we would have, in order to have secured that territory, you would have needed to have done things that would have been illegal. under international law. You needed to have killed a lot of people in order to pin down that country. The first thing you should have done would have been to divide the country into 4 pieces. You've got the Kurdish north, you've got the Shia south, which could have been called Mesopotamia, and the rest of it which could have been called Iraq, which would have been Sunni, and you would have had a bit in the middle, just like a secular region where they could have consolidated power, where they could have brokered peace between the 3 factions. That's what you could have had. And the second thing you would have needed to have done would have been to secure the borders immediately. That was not done. It was left to an interim government because they wanted to show that you are sovereign, your democracy, we are going to respect your democracy. Now, they seriously believed that they were going to be welcomed in as liberators, like they were in France and Holland in 44 and 45. It's ridiculous. The second thing that should have been done would have been that the entire population needed to have been disarmed. Now, you've got all these militias running around all over the place, but it needed that they would have needed time to have mobilised. And during that time, during that kind of initial period where the vacuum is created, it hasn't been filled yet. You just have anarchy. They should have used that period to fill it with their own force and deprived the Iraqi population of arms. Now, I'm someone who believes in the right to bear arms, but I believe in the right to bear arms for my people. I don't necessarily believe in the right to bear arms for other people. Freedom of speech should be prohibited. The whole country should be placed under a political terror. Anyone who wrote anything against the occupation forces should have been shot. If there were acts of resistance, partisan resistance, as there undoubtedly would have been, then that should have been retaliated against swiftly and decisively.
But to be honest, the West, as it stands in this period today, probably doesn't have the stomach to do something like that.
When, for example, those military police officers were surrounded in that kind of satellite town outside Basra and massacred. And the reason why they were massacred is because Tony Blair didn't give them the right equipment. And that was commented on in the Chilcot Inquiry. They had kind of crap 1980s radios in their Jeeps or something ridiculous like that. They didn't have communication devices on their person, which is what the American troops had. The British attitude towards the war was dire. Towards the end, the British soldiers were not allowed to leave their barracks in Basra in case the Iraqis attacked them, and there was another fatality in the British headlines. When that happened, the Iraqi provincial government got so frustrated they just contacted the Americans directly and said, "The British are not doing it, we need you to come and help." And by the time permission was given by the British Foreign Office to engage, the Americans had already engaged the enemy and had defeated them, and they were back in Baghdad. So the whole thing had finished and ended by the time the Foreign Office gave British troops permission to tentatively engage. That's not the way you occupy. The intelligence on enemy partisan activities was very poor. They could have the worst thing they did was to dismantle the Iraqi state, the Ba'ath state. They said that was because the Sunnis were in power, the rest of the population was disenfranchised, and they wanted to enfranchise the population. But in any kind of empire, if you will, that has 3 militant secular sectarian factions within it, you are going to have a scramble for the pie, and the losers are going to resent you. That's inevitable. And what they should have done is divide that country up, and they should have used the existing regime to impose law and order. If the Shias rose up, as I think they probably would have under those circumstances, they should have used the Sunnis to suppress them. I don't like this idea of introducing McDonald's and pornography, which are Western kind of degenerate cultural currents, which would have people underestimate the effect of Western culture on the Middle Eastern mind. I mean, people think that the Middle East hates us because of our interventions in these countries and because of our imperialism. Well, they don't hate us as they didn't hate us in the 40s and the 30s half as much as they do now. And part of the reason for that is because they despise us. They despise our culture. They despise the decadence. They despise the degeneracy. And that has been revealed to them through the modern age of mass communications. But it's also been impressed upon them by the often laissez-faire distribution of Western culture, such as pornography. So that's something I would not have allowed as governor of Iraq. I mean, Paul Bremer didn't even call himself a governor. Someone said when Iraq was made a US, I don't know what you'd call it, the US territory, US protectorate, Paul Bremer, who was effectively the governor, didn't want to be called governor or viceroy. He was scared because he wanted to be seen as like a liberator. That's how delusional they were.
Yeah, it's terrible.
And even now, today, they think, no, we were there as liberators. And they behaved as if they were liberators. But the people there don't want to be liberated by you. That's not what they call liberation. They call liberation empowerment. It's the same thing. And that's what the American mind doesn't understand about the Middle East. Because we had lost our empire, because we backed the wrong side in World War II, and the side that favoured imperialism lost, and the sides that favoured the dismantlement of imperialism won, namely the USA and the USSR. We lost our empire, so by the time we invaded in 2003, we had lost our experience in foreign countries, our experience in ruling foreign countries. We'd lost the translators, we'd lost the interpreters, we'd lost the diplomats. And we needed to build that up again, and we failed to do so because we failed to seem serious to the population we were occupying. There were cases where Iraqi officials or the kind of local strongmen actually joined the coalition side. They were seen wearing camouflage uniforms. And then they just switched suddenly because they realized the coalition didn't have a grip on the country and they could be killed at any moment. I don't think that the Sunni population don't instinctively support Al-Qaeda, but when Al-Qaeda is, when they're being, the puppet government the US installed was so sectarian, they banned all Sunnis from entering their government. So they just reversed the roles with Saddam. One of the things that al-Maliki did when the US gave him power was to refuse to allow Sunnis in his government and to ban Sunni parties. He suppressed demonstrations by Sunnis with armed violence, shooting many civilians. So he's basically a tyrant, a sectarian tyrant that the US installed, and they had no say over that because they installed him and they trusted him to liberate his country and be a good Democrat. This is just absolutely delusional. They don't understand the Islamic mind. They don't understand the Middle Eastern mind. I don't really understand it. I've never been to the Middle East, but I knew more than Paul Bremer. I know more than Paul Bremer. I know more than George Bush. It's frightening when you think about it. And one has to wonder, did they actually intend for the Middle East to explode? Do they actually want ISIS to come to power and to create mayhem in the region? That's a good question. It's a very good question to ask. Do they actually want the chaos? Is that why they were so incompetent? Or were they actually so locked into their delusion of being a force for good and being an exceptional nation and being the American dream, all this nonsense, that they actually thought they could enact it? And they were actually bound to try and enact it, and there's nothing anyone could have done to have stopped it, even themselves. It's a very good question. No, in order to suppress a country like that, you need to be able to shoot civilians. You need to be able to shoot large numbers of civilians in retaliation. Erich Priebke, who was the SS commander in Rome, he one of, I think 10 of his soldiers, 13 of his soldiers were killed. I may have got the figures wrong, but I know 13 soldiers were killed. And he under the 1929 Geneva Convention, you're allowed to kill up to 10 enemy civilians for each one of your soldiers killed by enemy partisan activity. He killed 135. He rounded up 135 men. He took them to the caves outside of Rome, and he shot them all with machine guns. And then he blew up the cave. When they prosecuted him at his trial, he rightly claimed that he was only acting under the Geneva Convention, which allows you to take up to 10 hostages and shoot them for every one of your soldiers killed by partisan activity. And he accidentally went 5 over, so he killed 135 instead of 130. And that was the way it was during World War II. All protagonists were allowed to do it. When they invaded the USSR, there was no obligation on them to limit the number of people who they shot, because the USSR was not a signatory of the Geneva Convention. And that's very much the way it should have been done in 2003, but they couldn't do that because the Western world is so pussy-whipped and so up to the eyes in lawyers. And it is a fact that the legal profession has gone out of control. Lawyers today deliberately complicate the law. I know this because I've been to lawyer societies at university, and they told
us to make it as vague as possible.
Yeah. They said, well, you don't want to let the side down. You don't make it concise. You make it as vague as possible. Similar thing with history lecture. I went to a Byzantine Studies history lecture, and the lecturer in the class, in the seminar, told all the pupils present the reason why we can't come to a concise conclusion onto what happened, why the Eastern Roman Empire didn't collapse, but the Western Empire did, is because the historians want to write more books on it and sell them. That's what he said. So, it's a problem with our society. It's not just a problem with the manhood of our society. It's a problem with corruption and groupthink, systemic corruption, and a culture of corruption. It's a huge industry that feeds, quite literally feeds off of a weakness, an imposing weakness, and restraining manliness in society and strength, and the white male majority or minority as it is today.
So they figured out they can make a lot of money from inhibiting manliness.
Yeah, there's a huge culture in the Western world based around dismantling the Western world, which is what you saw in the Western Roman Empire. So some would argue that this stage is inevitable, that when a civilization becomes so big, so prosperous, it inevitably can't find new frontiers to devour, so it just starts to devour itself. That's a legitimate.
I disagree with that viewpoint. I think what's happening now is unique. It's never happened before. There are similarities, but the whole this visceral self-hatred that we have of ourselves has never happened before.
Yes, but it's a legitimate point to make because there's a huge amount of money being made off of white guilt. I mean, just think of all the useless courses in this country that are being run and consume billions of pounds each year, or trillions of dollars or whatever it is, based around changing the skill set of the country. So to cope with deindustrialization, the shipping out of jobs, consumes vast amounts of public money. Vast sums of money being spent on changing the country to make it weaker. So basically, it's like a financially induced kind of mass suicide. I agree with you; it hasn't happened in the same way, but the means of communication and technology have changed so that it's become more insidious. So you can convince an entire, rather than just having some weird cult like Christianity that encourages pacifism and non-cooperation and civil disobedience. Now you've got like a huge movement that gets into people's brains, and because of the modern age and the mass media and the ability to influence millions of people simultaneously from a single point, you're able to penetrate the psyche of society far more rapidly and more deeply than has ever been possible to in the past. That's one of the most curious features of the modern decline that separates it from the ancient decline, is the rapidity of it.
Mm. Yes, well, the rapidity of it, as you say, could be down to the increase in technology or the development of technology. That more people can be affected on a broader scale now through mass communication. But as Ray said, we've well, as I extrapolated from talking to Ray, we've fallen, we've accomplished in we've declined in 70 years what took the Roman Empire 300 years to fall. I mean, like 70.
Well, I don't think we've collapsed quite the same way. I think there is. I mean, our frontiers have not collapsed. Rampaging hordes, but there was a period before that happened when lots of immigrants, lots of so-called refugees, or maybe they were real refugees at that time, were being forced upon the empire's borders. Yeah,
I'll say the difference is the Romans, they wouldn't have consciously wanted a decline, whereas we consciously have set out to destroy ourselves. We're doing everything that's self-destructive to our race.
Well, I put that down to the intensity of the mass media and its ability to influence so many millions of people. The coordination and the networking that goes on between the government, the mass media, and the educational system. You haven't really had that in a kind of. We've never had an age of mass technology before.
No.
Before about 150 years ago, we never had that. That's never existed before. So I think the differences can be put down to the scale of influence. If anything, multiracial societies only serve to break up societies, and the cultural Marxist Frankfurt School and other quasi-political and subversive bodies actually admit that that's what they want to do, but they think they're going to. They seem to be saying that they want to reconstruct society out of it by making society meaningless. All words are meaningless. You don't know. It's legitimate to, in the mind of the Frankfurt School, it's legitimate to argue that a screw might be just as good as a nut for any particular given task. Because who are you to say that a screw is worse than a nut, or a bolt, or a nail? So that all words become meaningless, all gender distinctions become meaningless. So society breaks down and just dissolves, disintegrates. But they seem to be wanting to reconstruct society. And I'm thinking to myself, what could they possibly wish to construct? What could they possibly wish to construct that requires the total dismantling of our language, even not just our race, but our language, our identity, the very concept of logic and meaning itself? Well, what could they be wishing? What could they be attempting to construct from that?
Well, did they specify that they wanted to build something on the ruins?
Beg your pardon?
Build something on the ruins of society after they destroyed it.
Or what? You know, the question is what? What do they want? Or what are they trying to accomplish?
I don't know. All right, do you want to wrap up the broadcast now?
Okay, yeah. Unless there's anything else you want to say.
I was going to talk about the South China Sea, but it's been 2 hours we've been talking.
What about the South China Sea?
Well, it's only a quick thing. Well, there's these islands in the South China Sea that China say have always been theirs.
They built a military base on top of one of them, haven't they?
Yeah, I think I read that.
On an island, but on top of an atoll.
But America disagrees with them, or the world's policeman, America disagrees with them, and says, I think it says they belong to the Philippines. And so they went to the international court in The Hague, and they ruled that the islands don't belong to China; they belong to the Philippines. And China just said, "Oh, fuck you! We ignore you anyway. You're useless." Well, China's not really taking The Hague seriously, and so America's a bit uppity about it. But see, in terms of territory, this is one of the only things that America and China go to have a conflict over. This is like the only piece of territory, as well as Taiwan.
I don't think they'll go to conflict over it. No.
No, I'm not saying they will, but it's like, you know, like you have Russia and Crimea.
Yeah.
And America keeps arguing about that. But in terms of an argument over territory with China, they've only really got the South China Sea that that America argues with China about.
Well, it's interesting that they built an artificial island there. It must have been a great feat of engineering. Yeah, I think that I don't think I think that China thinks too much of itself. I think they're going to become. They think they're going to become some kind of great superpower replacement for the US. Or the US.
By the end of this century, they're basically collapsed.
Well, the US, there's a finite number of resources and contacts and networks and trading positions to occupy. And at the moment, the US has something like 10 aircraft carriers, maybe more. But I don't really take their pretensions very seriously. I know they're a great regional power, but they will never be a great global power unless something bad, really bad, happens to the US. And of course, if China got rid of, blew up and destroyed all of America's aircraft carriers, well, they could just make some more, couldn't they? Because they control international finance. They're the hub. They're in a unique position. They can create infinite money. The United Nations headquarters is in New York. That's not exactly neutral, is it? The international financial centers are in New York. America has 2 coastlines, both of which face other ends of the old world. Extensive coastlines. So it's in an ideal trade position, navally speaking. It's an ideal strategic world position. I mean, America would have to go down. I mean, it's a good question to ask. What would happen if America descended into civil war?
America's going to go down eventually because all empires go down eventually.
Yeah.
He's going to lose
But
his power eventually.
I'm sceptical that anything could replace America, even if America vanished from the face of the earth tomorrow. I'm sceptical anything could. I don't think it would be China. You'd probably see an even more divided globe and more multipolar globe, not divided into two as it was during the Cold War, but something approaching something that looks like more like the 19th century than 20th century. It'd be a very uncertain world if America vanished. But perhaps it would be a world of new opportunities. It would be a world of new nations, and you'd see. I'm convinced that if the founding fathers came back to life today, there would be some who wouldn't be, but I think there would be mainly horrified, and they would have the present leaders put in irons. They probably would be amazed if they came back. If they were transported from 1776, they probably would be very hostile to the idea of there being a president, because America didn't have a president in its first few years. And if they did believe in having a president, they would be more skeptical about it than they were then. I think they would probably...
They'd be against the amount of military bases around the globe.
Sorry?
They didn't intend for America to have an empire-like status.
Well, people like Andrew Hamilton wanted an American empire, that type of system, but I don't think that's why I don't think they were looking that far forward when it happened. I think they were attempting to protect their honour and their trade and their assets. Essentially, it was about money, but it was more than that. It was about their rights to dispose of their wealth how they wished, and they felt affronted by being treated as a colonial, like children, really. I mean, they were treated with contempt by the British Parliament. There's no doubt. I don't think it was just about money. I think it was over money, but I think what really tipped the bucket was when they were so rudely insulted by the British Parliament, the British regime, and just told to go away. They were not being listened to. They were being fobbed off, essentially. So I think if they could come back today, I think most of them, I'm not saying all of them, but I think most of them would agree that the United States has exceeded its bounds. It was never intended for this person. They'd probably order it to be disbanded.
Domestically, America appears to me much more unstable than China, partly because of its multiracial makeup.
Well, it is domestically more unstable than China, but it has the means to suppress that instability, whereas China has to rely more on terror to do it. Right. China has its own instability. It has the Uyghurs, it has the Tibetans. It has to rely on terror in order to do it, and it's more inclined to rely on terror because the overt terror, that is, because the people don't have the same type of legal culture as they do in the United States, and they don't have like a Second Amendment.
Okay, let's wind it up then. Right, do you want to edit out this last bit that I'm going to say?
What's that?
Well, because if we're going to put it online, then this bit is a bit inappropriate. Where we're just talking to each other about stopping the broadcast.
Well, it could be handy for people to know that it is being stopped.
Okay.
Why don't you put it on unlisted, and I'll download it and I'll edit it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah. Okay, right. I'm going to stop the broadcast, and I'll give you the link. Start up Skype. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.